The Case of the Pocket Diary Found in the Snow, Chapter 3. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording today by Dawn Larson in Minnesota. The Case of the Pocket Diary Found in the Snow by Fra Augusta Groner. Chapter 3. The Lonely Cottage. 15 minutes after the driver had made his report to Commissioner von Mayringen, the latter, with Amster, entered another cab. A well-armed policeman mounted the box of this second vehicle. "Follow the cab ahead," the commissioner told his driver. The second cab followed the one-horse coupe in which Muller was seated. They drove first to number 14 Cathedral Lane, where Muller told Berner to come with him. He found Mr. Fellner ready to go also, and it was with great difficulty that he could dissuade the invalid, who was greatly fatigued by his morning visit to the police station, from joining them. The carriages then drove off more quickly than before. It was now quite dark, a gloomy, stormy winter evening. Muller had taken his place on the box of his cab and sat peering out into the darkness. In spite of the sharp wind and the ice that blew against his face, the detective could see that they were going out from the more closely built portions of the city and were now in new streets with half-finished houses. Soon they passed even these and were outside of the city. The way was lonely and dreary, bordered by wooden fences on both sides. Muller looked sharply to right and to left. "You should have become alarmed here," he said to the driver, pointing to one part of the fence. "Why?" asked the man. "Because this is where the window was broken." "I didn't know that until I got home." You must have been nicely drunk." The driver murmured something into his beard. "Stop here. This is your turn, down that street," Muller said a few moments later, as the driver turned the other way. "How do you know that?" asked the man, surprised. "None of your business. This street will take us there just the same." "Probably, but I prefer to go the way you went yesterday." "Very well, it's all the same to me." They were silent again. Only the wind roared around them, and somewhere in the distance a foghorn moaned. It was now 6 o'clock. The snow threw out a mild light which could not brighten the deep darkness around them. About half an hour later the first cab halted. "There's the house up there. Shall I drive to the garden gate?" "No, stop here." Muller was already on the ground. "Are there any dogs here?" he asked. "I didn't hear any yesterday." "That's of no value. You didn't seem to hear much of anything yesterday." Muller opened the door of the cab and helped Berner out. The old man was trembling. "That was a dreadful drive," he stammered. "I hope you will be happier on the drive back," said the detective, and added, "You stay here with the commissioner now." The latter had already left his cab with his companion. His sharp eyes glanced over the heavily shaded garden and the little house in its midst. A little light shone from two windows of the first story. The men's eyes looked toward them, then the detective and Amster walked toward a high picket fence which closed the garden on the side nearest its neighbors. They shook the various pickets without much caution, for the wind made noise enough to kill any other sound. Amster called to Muller. He had found a loose picket, and his strong young arms had torn it out easily. Muller motioned to the other three to join them. A moment later they were all in the garden, walking carefully toward the house. The door was closed, but there were no bars at the windows of the ground floor. Amster looked inquiringly at the commissioner, and the latter nodded and said, "All right, go ahead." The next minute Amster had broken in through one pane of the window and turned the latch. The inner window was broken already, so that it was not difficult for him to open it without any further noise. He disappeared into the dark room within. In a few seconds they heard a key turn in the door and it opened gently. The men entered, all except the policeman, who remained outside. The blind of his lantern was slightly opened and he had his revolver ready in his hand. Muller had opened his lantern also, and they saw that they were in a prettily furnished corridor from which the staircase and one door led out. The four men tiptoed up the stairway and the commissioner stepped to the first of the two doors which opened on to the upper corridor. He turned the key which was in the lock and opened the door, but they found themselves in a room as dark as was the corridor. From somewhere, however, a ray of light fell into the blackness. The official stepped into the room, pulling Berner in after him. The poor old man was in a state of trembling excitement when he found himself in the house where his beloved young lady might already be a corpse. One step more and a smothered cry broke from his lips. The commissioner had opened the door of an adjoining room, which was lighted and handsomely furnished. Only the heavy iron bars across the closed windows showed that the young lady who sat leaning back wearily in an armchair was a prisoner. She looked up as they entered. The expression of utter despair and deep weariness which had rested on her pale face changed to a look of terror. Then she saw that it was not her would-be murderer who was entering, but those who came to rescue. A bright flush illuminated her cheeks and her eyes gleamed, but the change was too sudden for her tortured soul. She rose from her chair, then sank fainting to the floor. Berner threw himself on his knees beside her, sobbing out, "She is dying! She is dying!" Muller turned on the instant, for he had heard the door on the other side of the hall open, and a tall, slender man with a smooth face and a deep scar on his right cheek stood on the threshold looking at them in dazed surprise. For an instant only had he lost his control. The next second he was in his room again, slamming the door behind him. But it was too late. Amster's foot was already in the crack of the door and he pushed it open to let Muller enter. "Well done!" cried the latter, and then he turned to the man in the room. "Here, stop that. I can fire twice before you get the window open." The man turned and walked slowly to the center of the room, sinking down into an armchair that stood beside the desk. Neither Amster nor Muller turned their eyes from him for a moment, ready for any attempt on his part to escape. But the detective had already seen something that told him that Langen was not thinking of flight. When he turned to the desk, Muller had seen his eyes glisten, while a scornful smile parted his thin lips. A second later he had let his handkerchief fall, apparently carelessly, upon the desk. But in this short space of time the detective's sharp eyes had seen a tiny bottle, upon which was a black label with a grinning skull. Muller could not see whether the bottle was full or empty, but now he knew that it must hold sufficient poison to enable the captured criminal to escape open disgrace. Knowing this, Muller looked with admiration at the calmness of the villain, whose intelligent eyes were turned towards him in evident curiosity. "Who are you and who else is here with you?" asked the man calmly. "I am Muller of the Secret Service," replied his visitor, and added, "You must put up with us for the time being, Mr. Egon Langen. The police commissioner is occupied with your stepsister, whom you were about to murder." Langen put his hand to his cheek, looking at Muller between his lashes as he said, "To murder? Who can prove that?" "We have all the proofs we need." "I will acknowledge only that I wanted Asta to disappear." Muller smiled. What good would that have done you? You wanted her entire fortune, did you not?" "But that could have come